Good afternoon, friends. This video is focusing on when there is effective change in rate of GST applicable for supply of goods or services. With respect to recommendation of 56 GST Council meeting, and there's two-tier rate, 5% and 18%, slab of 12% and 28% is being going away, and 40% slab is being fixed for sin goods, including luxury goods. So effective date of change in GST rate going to be 22nd of September 2025. Then this video becoming important to determine when the old rate is applicable or when new rate is applicable. We are having three events. One is the date of supply of goods or services. One is date of invoice, and one is date of receipt of money by the supplier. And then we have to determine what is the rate, old rate or new rate. Let's say supply is being made prior to 22nd September 2025, but invoice is being issued after 22nd September, and payment is also being received after 22nd September. And there would be multiple combination. So when old rate, when new rate. Interesting, right? Section 14 of CGST Act important. But when I was running through frequently asked question issued by CBIC, they have only considered one of the situation, whereas there are 5 other situations also being prescribed when we look at what rate, whether old rate or new rate. So I'm sharing my screen so that we can get a clarity when old rate applicable or new rate applicable. New rate, which is the reduced rate, effective from 22nd September 2025. Let's look at this particular, point provision coming from Section 14 of CGST Act. So this is the table which is coming out as per the provision of Section 14, subsection A and subsection B. Let's look at the scenario which I've created and which is easy to digest. If supply is being made before 22nd September, but invoice is being issued after 22nd September, and payment is also received after 22nd September, then 2 out of 3. So there are 3 events, right? Date of supply, date of invoice, and date of receipt of money by the supplier. So 2 out of 3 happening post 22nd September, new rate going to be applicable. That is what the you should keep to your mind. And 2 out of 3 happening before 22nd September. अगर 22 सितंबर से पहले 2 इवेंट हो गए आउट ऑफ 3, तो आपका ओल्ड रेट लगेगा. ये आपको याद रखने के लिए अपने माइंड में रखना है. बट कुछ इश्यूज हैं जो हम डिस्कस करेंगे. पहले हम समझ लेते हैं सेक्शन 14 सबसेक्शन ए एंड सबसेक्शन बी कहता क्या है. So in the first situation, which is row number 1, 2 out of 3 happening after 22nd September, जहां पे date of receipt of payment and date of invoice, issue of invoice is after the date when there is change in GST rate, then POT, point of taxation, time of supply would be date of receipt of money or date of invoice, whichever is earlier, and new rate going to be applicable. Here is no challenge because you can raise the invoice with a new rate applicable. Only the POT would be whichever is earlier, date of receipt of money or date of invoice. Second situation, you are supplying a prior to 22nd September. Your invoice is also prior to 22nd September, but payment is being received after 22nd September. So 2 out of 3 prior to 22nd September, old rate going to be applicable, and time of supply would be date of issue of invoice. And this is what you must keep to your mind for this transition time period when there is change in GST rate, reduced rate, 5% and 18% slab with 40% for sin and luxury goods. So this table is going to be very important for you to take a note of it. Third situation, you have supplied prior to 22nd September, but you are raising invoice after 22nd September. and getting paid before 22nd September. So 2 out of 3 prior to 22nd September, your old rate going to be applicable. Now look at the scenario which is most critical and we need to understand. In this case, they are saying old rate, whereas you are raising invoice after 22nd September, but still you will apply old rate. So even the law provision, which is existing as on date, is not matching with the line. It should have been either simpler, but that is what section 14 is being referred in frequently asked question. So as per our understanding से हमको तो इतना ही मालूम है, as per this provision, 2 out of 3 before 22nd September old rate, 2 out of 3 after 22nd September new rate applicable. But this situation is becoming critical. आपके लिए ओल्ड रेट एप्लीकेबल है बिकॉज ऑफ 2 आउट ऑफ 3, बट आपने इनवॉइस तो 22nd सितंबर के बाद रेज किया है. So this is going contrary when we look at the normal understanding, but this is what I'm explaining to you, and this is another area where you need to take conscious call and decide accordingly. Now coming back to the section 14 subsection B, which is again with 3 options suggested. 2 out of 3 before 22nd September old rate, 2 out of 3 after 22nd September new rate applicable. But look at the scenario, how it is being explained with the provision as existing today. Let's say supply made after 22nd September. Invoice is being issued prior to 22nd September. Payment is being received after 22nd September. So 2 out of 3 after 22nd September, new rate applicable. But you have already raised the invoice. When you have already raised the invoice prior to 22nd September, quite obvious, you might have charged old rate. But in this case scenario, new rate applicable and time of supply would be date of receipt of money. So bear in mind, this is what section 14 subsection B Roman 1 is saying. Second situation, supplying after 22nd September, but invoice raised prior to 22nd September, and payment is also received prior to 22nd September. So 2 out of 3 prior to 22nd September, old rate applicable, and time of supply would be date of receipt of payment or date of invoice, whichever is earlier. Third situation, payment after 22nd, supply after 22nd September, supply, date of supply. Invoice is after 22nd September, but payment received prior to 22nd September. New rate applicable, 2 out of 3 after 22nd September, new rate applicable. And here no challenge because invoice is also being raised after 22nd September 2025. So these are the provision which is coming from the provision when there is change in the rate of tax in respect of supply of goods or services. Changes in rate of tax in respect of supply of goods or services. And it is starting with the provision notwithstanding anything contained in section 12 and 13. So overriding time of supply for goods, time of supply for services, and saying what would be the rate applicable, whether the old rate or new rate, and 2 possible scenarios are being created with alternative option. Now here my another comment would be advance against supply of goods is not chargeable to GST. You know that. Effective from 15th of November 2017. Only advance against supply of services is chargeable to GST. Am I right? GST leviable on such advance against supply of services. But when we read section 14, it is applying to both supply of goods or services and making alternative combination before and after, and 3 possible situation, 3 event, 2 before change in rate, old rate, 2 after change in rate, new rate applicable. But still a lot of ambiguity exists, and even in frequently asked question, they have picked up only section 14 subsection A Roman 1 and did not discuss other combination. So maybe this particular video will help you and will guide you what is the best practice way forward. To my mind, as if looks like to me, invoice which is being issued before 22nd September, we can say old rate applicable. An invoice which is being issued after 22nd September. So they're the corresponding provision when to raise invoice, right? When you look at section 31, section 31 says you must raise invoice before or at the time of supply. Am I right? At latest at the time of supply. And in case of services, there's a 30 days time period that you can raise the invoice before or after provision of services. So in this situation, the simplicity should be, जो मुझे लगता है कि अगर invoice prior to 22nd September raise किया आपने, in specific situation when there is change in GST rate, मैं सिर्फ उसके लिए कह रहा हूं, अगर before 22nd September अगर आपने invoice raise किया तो old rate लग जाए, और आफ्टर 22nd September इनवॉइस रेज किया विद रेस्पेक्ट टू सेक्शन 31 कि आपको कब इनवॉइस जनरेट करना है, उसको आपको ध्यान में रखना है। तो अगर आपने 22nd September के बाद अगर इनवॉइस रेज किया है तो न्यू रेट एप्लीकेबल। दैट माइट गिव यू लिटिल मोर सिंप्लिसिटी rather than the combination of option when we look at section 14, and that too we have discussed where the contrary position is coming out कि इनवॉइस आपने पहले रेज किया लेकिन बिकॉज टू इवेंट सप्लाई और पेमेंट आफ्टर चेंज इन रेट है तो नया रेट लगेगा। तो ऐसे केस में आप कैसे फिर एक सप्लीमेंट्री इनवॉइस आपको रेज करना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि आपने जो पहले ओल्ड इनवॉइस रेज किया होगा उस पर ओल्ड रेट लगाए होंगे। अब चूंकि नया रेट एप्लीकेबल है, जिस एग्जाम्पल को मैं आपसे डिस्कस कर रहा हूं, तो डिफरेंशियल जो जीएसटी रेट का होगा उसके लिए आपको नया रेट, कई जगह पे आपको देखना पड़ेगा, कुछ रेट हमने चेंज भी किए हैं, 12 से 18 भी किए हैं। जब हमने प्रेस रिलीज डिस्कस की थी तो मैंने कई आइटम आपसे डिस्कस किए थे सेक्टर स्पेसिफिक, और वहां मैंने बताया था कि स्पेसिफिक आइटम वाइज अगर आप देखेंगे गुड्स के केस में या सर्विसेज के केस में, लाइक फुटवेयर आपको याद आ रहा होगा, जहां पे more than 2,500 exceeding 2,500 rupees आर्टिकल्स, टेक्सटाइल आर्टिकल्स, आपको अपैरल याद आ रहे होंगे। सर्विसेज में जीएसटी रेट 12 से 18 हुए हैं कई आइटम के ऊपर, तो रेट इंक्रीज भी हुए हैं। तो आपको ध्यान देना पड़ेगा लुकिंग एट योर बिजनेस सिनेरियो जिसमें आप डील करते हैं, फिर आपको ये सेक्शन 14 की एप्लीकेशन। बट मैंने एक सजेशन दिया कि अगर इफ सीबीआईसी ऑफिशियल्स आर लिसनिंग टू मी, दे मे कम आउट विद अ क्लैरिफिकेशन थ्रू ए सर्कुलर और मे क्लैरिफाई a simplistic position which I discussed. Invoice raised before 22nd September, old rate. Invoice raised after 22nd September, new rate. Within the four corners, within the time limit to generate the invoice when we look at section 31 of CGST Act. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. Thank you very much.